Hello everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel called Living in Hayward, Wisconsin, where we talk about all things real estate related and also just about living in Hayward. I'm Audrey Miller. I'm the broker owner of Northwest Wisconsin Realty Team, and today we are continuing our series regarding what lakefront property can I afford in northern Wisconsin, and specifically around the Hayward and Stone Lake areas. So today we're going to focus on properties that sold in 2025 in the range of $500,000 to $750,000, and I'm going to kind of show you some photos of those properties, describe them just a bit, and give you an idea of what you'd be able to end up with in a property if your budget was in that $500,000 to $750,000 range. I've already done a series on the under $300,000, not series, but a video on the under $300,000, then $300,000 to $500,000, and now we're at $500,000 to $750,000, and then we'll have a couple more after this as well in this probably 6-part series that I'm going to run over the winter. So this is for properties that sold in 2025 in the Hayward and Stone Lake areas specifically, which is the primary market that I work in. So follow along to see some photos, and I'll kind of talk about some statistics related to that category of lakefront property. And hey, I'm happy to have you here on my channel. Feel free to reach out anytime if you're interested in buying or selling, or just have general questions about the area. And also like, subscribe, follow my channel, share it with other people, comment. I love to hear from my viewers. So anyway, thanks for being here today. All right, so first of all, just a couple of statistics before we dive into the specifics of some of these properties that sold in the $500,000 to $750,000 range. I would call this range the lower to mid-range of everything that we have for sale in the Hayward area on waterfront. It's a respectable budget to get on many of the area lakes, depending on the size of lake that you want to be on, depending on the updatedness of the home, the square footage of the home. And as you'll see as we go through here, it's always on this continuum of lake size versus price point, and then what house you can get. Just basically, when you're purchasing on one of the tier 1 or tier 2 lakes in particular, you're paying a lot for the land itself. And so if your budget is in the $500,000 to $700,000, you may only be able to purchase an empty lot on 𝐿acoudere or Round Lake for that price point. But if you get down into a little bit smaller lake, or you find something on one of those lakes that maybe needs a little bit of work, you can still get on those lakes in this budget, but you're going to compromise on some other things. Whereas if you're on a smaller lake in the area, you can get a beautiful, bigger home in this price range, but then you're compromising on lake size. So it just depends what is important to each buyer as I begin to work with you. Some of the main questions that I ask at the beginning are what your minimum lake size requirement is, what geographic area you want to be in, and what your minimum bedrooms and bathrooms are. Because that's sort of the 3 factors that will really affect the price the most. And if you're a seller, you might find this interesting to watch, because you can kind of see like where your property might fall as you're looking through this series and say, okay, my property matches this or that. It might be in that 600 range or 700 range in terms of price point. But always just get a hold of me if you're a seller. I do listing and lakefront a lot. That's a bulk of my business. So I would be happy to help you to come out and do a free comparative market analysis and let you know exactly what your property is probably worth in the current market. So feel free to reach out anytime. So now in 2025, there were 23 properties total that sold in this $500,000 to $750,000 range with a Hayward or a Stone Lake zip code. Hayward is a really big zip code, so that covers a big area. And then Stone Lake is kind of price point wise very similar to Hayward, whereas the rest of the surrounding areas are a little less expensive. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you're looking outside of Hayward and Stone Lake, which are kind of the hub of the vacation area, you can get a little more for your money, like in Winter or 𝐿HV&x and Minong, even down towards Spooner, all of those areas. But this series is just focusing on the Hayward and Stone Lake areas. So 23 homes total, and of the properties in this price range of the $500,000 to $700,000, the average square footage was 1,977 square feet, and the average price point was $636,000. The average days on market was 95. And I always say that's from when it listed to when it closed. So they were basically going under contract within an average of 30 days, give or take a little bit, maybe 30 to 45 days to go under contract. And from the list price that was listed when it went under contract, the list price it was at, the property sold for 96.7% of that price. So you are starting to see buyers have just a little bit more, not a lot, but a few percentage of negotiation room as we have transitioned to slightly more of a buyer's market. It's still a seller's market in our area. We have low inventory. We have more buyers than sellers, but there is getting to be a little more leverage on the buyer's side as we have gone through 2025. So sellers need to be aware of that when you're pricing your property. You have to price it for the 2025 market or 2026, whatever year we're in. You can't price it for the 2022 market when we're 3 years after that. So these are things to keep in mind. And the market will tell you right away. I mean, the market is still strong enough on the seller side. If you're too high, your property will sit. You'll know within a couple of weeks whether you're priced appropriately or not. So anyway, that's kind of the overall look at the statistics and average price and days on market, etc., for the 23 properties with a Hayward and Stone Lake zip code that sold in 2025 between $500,000 and $750,000. And then I pulled out 7 specific properties to kind of go through in detail with you, because I think that's the best way to give you an idea of what you can get for your money. And we're going to show you pictures of those properties, because they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. So that might help you to kind of get a feel for what you might be able to afford. Sometimes I just refer buyers to these series. You know, the last one I did was back in March of 2024, and it was called What Lakefront Property Can I Afford? And I felt like we needed to, year and a half later, almost 2 years later, I felt like we needed to go through this again, because that information is always changing. So this is kind of just a helpful thing for you to watch. If you're like, okay, I'm thinking I'm in that $500,000 to $750,000 range that I'm comfortable spending, what can I get? Because a lot of times buyers need to align their expectations with price points, you know, and you can do that by going and looking at houses and kind of realizing it that way, or you can do it by something like this series and you go, okay, this is what I can get for this price. The more your expectations and your price point align, the easier your search will be. I guess I would just say it that way. And probably the less disappointment you'll feel as you go along, because you kind of prepared for what to expect in terms of the end result when you're working within a budget. Everybody's got a budget. No shame to it. I'm happy to sell to anybody, no matter the budget, but it's just more about the expectations and kind of aligning those with what is actually going on in the market. And when I was going through and choosing which properties to highlight in this price point category, I first of all wanted to get a range. So one's toward the higher end of this range and ones that are toward the lower end and the middle. So that was one of my objectives. The second is to talk about properties that I actually either was part of the transaction on the buyer or seller side, or that I viewed in person. So that just gave me more insight into the properties versus ones that I wasn't in. It's kind of amazing when you work full-time as an agent in this area. I've been in many of the properties that sold this year, either showing them, writing an offer, maybe I'm the listing agent, maybe I ended up working with the buyer. So there's several of these that I was on the buyer and seller side, some that I was just on the buyer side, and some that I just showed and that didn't turn into a sale that I was part of. So the first one is on Upper A, and this was out on Spider Lake, which is a very nice lake. I would call it a tier 3 lake. The only reason that it's a little bit lower tier, in my opinion, is proximity to Hayward. It's a little further and it's to the east. And Spider Lake is a very nice lake, but it does have the restrictions on water sports. And some people really like the quiet lakes, which are Teal, Spider, Lost Land, and Ghost Lake. But a lot of people prefer the motorized or water sport lakes, full recreational. So that does keep the prices down just a little bit more out on Spider Lake. But this was a really nice big home, as you can see, almost 3,000 square feet, built in 2012. There was a 2-car detached garage, nice and private. It was at the end of a dead end, and it was actually situated on 1.8 acres. I think the thing that made this one a little bit tougher of a sell was the frontage itself. There was a boardwalk. You can see this when you look through these photos here that they'll have up on the screen for me. But it had a long boardwalk going out, and then even when you got out to the end of the dock, the water was very mucky on the bottom, and so it wasn't really swimmable frontage. But yet, you're on a very nice tier 3 clear lake for a sale price of $730,000. This was listed for $750,000, sold for $730,000, and it did have a double lot, 204 feet of frontage and extra privacy. So those were big pluses of that property. And it took 146 days on market. Again, I think the main reason was the frontage itself was not for everybody. So that one took a little bit longer than the average to close. This second one is on Summers Point Lane on the Chippewa Flowage. This is almost new construction, built in 2021. That's when the construction started. And then the sellers did a lot of the work themselves. The husband has construction background and experience, so they did a lot of it themselves. So it took them a few years to get it finished, and they just finished it up in 2025. Some things changed in their lives and their plans, so they ended up contacting me to put it on the market for them. And before they actually got a chance to finish the basement completely and put it on the market, they kind of, gave it to me as a pocket listing, where if I found a buyer, we would just get the deal done. Ended up there was some people that I was working with who were specifically looking on the Chippewa flowage. So we ended up coming to terms on this without it really ever officially hitting the market. And my buyers bought it with the basement still unfinished, and then they were going to put their touches on that after they purchased it. So it did have a 1-car plus a couple lean-tos on the garage. So it was kind of almost more like a 2-car size, just the layout was a little bit different. That was a detached garage. Beautiful setting for this home, beautiful finishes and fixtures throughout, really great curb appeal. Again, on the Chippewa flowage, a nice sandy frontage, more than some places on the flowage. The house itself was 1,900 square feet. That did include the finished space that would be finished downstairs. So without that, it was actually 1,200 square feet that was already finished. And in the end, when it's all done, it's 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. And again, though, almost brand new construction. So that's unusual. We don't have a lot of new construction that comes on the market, or almost new construction. And that one, days on market don't really apply because it actually went under contract before it ever officially hit the market. We had listed it for $779. That was going to include the finished basement. My buyers ended up getting it for $727.5. They negotiated with the seller to do a lot of that finishing themselves. This next one on Schultz Lane, this is on Stone Lake, near the town of Stone Lake. Stone Lake is a 500 and some acre lake. Beautiful, clear lake, beautiful sandy bottom at this property. This was actually on quite a bit of acreage, 4.51 acres. So there was relative privacy there compared to a lot of places, and it did have 277 feet of frontage. So in this case, you were paying a better part of your budget for the land itself and the setting. There was no garage at this, just a small storage building. It was listed for $749.9, ended up selling for $710, and this was built in 1970. So I guess one of the reasons I showed this one more than once, I think one of the reasons it may be, even with all this land and beautiful frontage, the price was a little more modest was because the house was older and it had some quirky design features that weren't maybe the best layout for every buyer. So I think that's part of what kept it just a little bit lower on price than it may have been had the layout been a little bit different, because it did have good square footage and it had 3 bedrooms and 2.5 baths. And that one took 88 days from the time it came on the market till it closed. So that was less than average. The average was 95, as I mentioned earlier. This next one here, this cute little blue 2-story or 1.5-story home was on 𝐿𝐵𝐻. So that's on a tier 1 lake in the area. I actually worked on the listing and buying side on this one. The thing that caused this one, the sale price was $625. We listed originally, I think, for $699, dropped it to $650 after a bit, and then ended up settling on a $625 price point. It was a 100-year-old home, and it also had very high elevation. So beautiful lot, beautiful frontage, but the house was very livable, but just older. The layout was kind of outdated, but I'm so excited for the buyers who bought this. I know it was a tough decision for the sellers. Their family had been there for many, many years. They were wonderful to work with, but the buyers have other family in the Victory Heights area, and it was so cool to see them and their kids excited about having their own place, and I think they're going to make tons of great memories. I'm sure they'll do some improvements over the years as they use the cabin, but that was a 4-bedroom, 1 full bath on 0.84 acres, about 1,500 square feet, and a 2-car detached garage, and actually a couple other little buildings like a little man cave and a shed. But yeah, it had high elevation and an older home. That one was 148 days on market. This next one here, and this kind of gives you an example of how your budget can be a little bit lower for a nicer home if you're on a smaller lake, but still in a good location in proximity to Hayward. So this was new construction on Pheasant Lane, and this was on a little lake called Lovejoy, which is close to Round Lake, and maybe not a lot of people know it even exists because you can't really see it from the road at all, but it's a little 77-acre lake. This was a brand new construction built in 2025, sitting on almost half an acre, 2,100 square feet of finished living space, a detached 2-car garage, and 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. And it was really beautifully done. Medium to high elevation at this property, not a huge amount of yard space, and it's right across from the golf course, the Lakeview golf course. So there is more activity there, and kind of it's not as quiet, a little bit closer neighbors and stuff. But that was listed for $599 and ended up selling for $595. It was on the market for 106 days. But that's an example of a smaller lake, but a newer, obviously brand new, nicer home, and still within the same range. But you've got a clean, clear, beautiful lake, but it's on the smaller side in terms of things you might want to do on a lake. This next one is on Division Avenue. This is also on the lake of Stone Lake. And I showed this one once or twice as well. This was built in 1942, so it's definitely an older home, but it had quite a few updates done. Again, beautiful frontage, sandy bottom, low elevation to the water. Those are all pluses. It was 1,796 square feet of finished space, actually a little less than the normal amount of frontage because it was grandfathered in, 87 feet of frontage. A one-car detached garage that actually had a cool little living quarters kind of apartment building with its own bathroom and bedroom and stuff up above the garage. And that one ended up being on the market 81 days total, so it sold pretty quickly. It was listed for $550, ended up selling for $505. And this house needed maybe a little bit of TLC. It was in decent condition, decent to good, I would say, not great. So that's, you know, again, you know, you're on a what I would call a tier 2 lake, but not huge square footage, you know, at 1,796 square feet, a little bit older, but then great waterfront and great elevation to the water. So I'm sure whoever bought that is very happy that they ended up there. And then this last one is on Moose Lake out on Whaley Drive. So this one's kind of close to the 𝐬𝐲𝐫𝐸, close to Louis Landing out there, a little bit in the middle of nowhere, but a really awesome little cabin, 1,300 square feet. Really has that Northwoods quaint feel. It's not full log, but it kind of looks like it is, just the way they built it. There's a detached 2-car garage, and this one had more privacy than any of the others that I've mentioned. So that was one of the big selling points for my buyer. Not only was it pretty low elevation to the water, really nice frontage, but very private. You cannot see a neighbor from this property, which if you've looked at property here, you know that's not as common. Privacy is always a big plus. So this was built in 1983. There was a 2-car detached garage, 121 feet of frontage. It sat on 2.11 acres, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. And my buyer is going to be doing some updates to it. He's going to be adding an addition, kind of expanding the kitchen living room area, making that all open concept, creating a master suite. So it's going to be pretty cool when he's done with it. He liked the price point of this. And I can tell you this was listed for $499. There were multiple offers and my buyer got it for $5,025. We wrote a really strong offer. So it was only 74 days on market total, but that was because the seller preferred an extended closing. It actually went under contract in 2 days or 3 days after it came on the market. So that was on Moose Lake. Moose Lake doesn't garner quite as high of prices just because it's more of a flowage and it's a little further from town. But in this case, this was a solid home that my buyer saw a lot of potential in to make their own and get in at an entry price of just over $500,000. So I hope this is helpful to you in some way as you're looking to search or looking to sell. I think that, you know, there's a property for everyone, any price point around the area, as long as you kind of know what to expect. So hopefully this gives you a little snapshot into what you might be able to find if your budget is in that $500,000 to $750,000 range. Thank you for listening, and I hope to hear from you sometime soon.